Jake's POV. "I'll see you in a sec," I said, before Suma and Vindica flew up the side of the cliff and out of view. "I summon you, Paxus," I heard Vompak shout in the distance, and his familiar disappeared. Then Vindica's did. Then finally I did. Once I arrive, I looked to the path up ahead, and a feeling of dread washed over me. "What's wrong?" Suma asked. "Nothing. I just don't like caves is all," I said, gesturing to the cramped opening to a small cave. It couldn't be more than a meter tall and wide, large enough for them, but I would need to get on my hands and knees to squeeze through. I've never been afraid of tight spaces, but this wasn't exactly the same thing. "Quit dawdling, let's go," Vompak said, perching on his familiar saddle and heading into the cave. "I think I may have to ride on your familiar saddle, Vindica. Jake is too tall for this," Suma said, examining the cave. "Of course," Vindica answered. Suma fluttered over and landed on the side of the saddle, because there wasn't a second proper perch I had to use. They made their way into the cave behind Vompak, and I was left outside. "Oh joy," I mumbled, and got on my hands and knees to begin crawling. The cave was tight, or at least it felt that way. In reality, I wasn't touching the sides or top of the cave, but that didn't mean I wasn't feeling the pressure. Thankfully, Vompak knew how to create fire, so he lit the way for us. I was grateful for it. I knew I wouldn't have been able to handle the cave if it was pitch black. "Just close your eyes and keep moving," I quickly whispered to myself. As we went along, the cave grew more and more narrow. Eventually, there was no more than an inch of space between me and the sides of the cave. I was not handling it well. Suma's POV. "The cave we were walking through started out wide enough, but as we moved along it became less so. Vindica's and Vompak's familiars were having no issues as far as I could tell, but Jake grew more and more distressed with each passing moment. I could hear his breathing getting heavier and more frequent." "Is Jake going to be okay?" Vindica asked me, too quietly for the others to hear. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I have never seen him like this." "Stop," Vompak announced from the front. "What's wrong?" Jake called out, slightly panicked. "There is a fork up ahead, left or right?" Vompak answered. "Which one is bigger?" I asked, trying to make it easier on Jake. "Left," he called back, after a brief moment of silence. I heard Jake let out an audible sigh. We continued on for a while through the left path, and while Vompak was right about it being wider, that didn't mean it was wide enough. "I can't fit Paxus any longer. We either need to turn back or send our familiars away until we are out of this cave," he announced. "Our ghost was having trouble too," Vindica agreed. "Jake?" I asked. "Send me back," he said, simple but urgently. His eyes were wide, and he was almost on his stomach by this point. Without another word, I unsummoned Jake, and he disappeared back to his world. Vindica and Vompak followed suit, and soon it was just we three Nume, standing in a dimly lit cave. Without our familiars, the cave felt far less cramped, but certainly not wide open. POV of Vompak. "I and my team, two lesser Nume, stood in a cave that I was keeping lit with a fire spell. I was creating a ball of fire that hung in the air a few feet away, illuminating us enough to see." "I guess this means we fly," the unnamed Nume stated. Earlier she received a name from a familiar, but I refused to acknowledge such a manner of receiving a name on principle. "We will have to be careful. This tunnel is getting even more narrow the further we travel. If we fly too fast, we might be injured," the unnamed Suma said, stating the obvious. Of course, I had already known to fly carefully. I did not need her to remind me of such trivial things. She was another one who had been named by that annoying familiar, but since the Grand Duke had already acknowledged her name, it was illegal for any Nume to refuse to use it, so I had no choice in the matter. "Just try not to get left behind," I told them, and began flying down the tunnel. They followed suit. My fire spell produces light, but its range is limited, so if they fall behind, then they would need to either create their own spell, or they would be lost in the dark. I graciously flew slower than I wanted to, so as not to outpace them, but of course I received no thanks. "Vompak, slow down, you are flying too fast," the unnamed one called out. I should have known. Even holding back, I far outclassed any commoner. Unfortunately, listening to that commoner distracted me, and I was unable to see and react to the end of the tunnel, as it approached from the darkness outside of the effects of my spell. "Ah!" I cried out, before trying to slow down, but colliding into the wall, nonetheless. The POV of Lorik is Bala. My team and I have been scaling the mountain for 3 hours at this point, but now we stood at the top. "We should spread out and search for those bands," I suggested. The others agreed, and we began looking for them. The mountain top was beautiful. The trees and forested area had been left behind some time ago, but it was replaced by snow and ice. Loyalty was having trouble with the cold, So I unsummoned him and rode on the back of one of the other two familiars. While we were searching, I decided to simply fly low to the ground so we could cover as much area as possible. Found them, one of the others called out. We all converged on the area and saw 4 silver bands hanging from metal poles. 4 of them? That means we are the first to arrive, one of the other two noticed. Perhaps, but that doesn't mean we'll be the first back to camp. We should get moving, I said. We took one and strapped it to the saddle of one of our familiars, then began heading down the mountain. Vindica's POV. Thud. The sound resonated through the tunnel as Von Pack slammed into the end of the tunnel and fell to the floor. I laughed briefly, before catching myself and landing safely on the ground by Von Pack, who was completely unconscious. Well, if you have to be knocked out, best to do it with 2 healers in the room, I said, and began treating Von Pack's injuries. Suma cast her own fire spell as Von Pack's disappeared as soon as he fell unconscious. What was he thinking? Suma complained. Probably something like, I'm the best flyer in the world. I don't need to wait on these commoners, I mocked. Ugh, Von Pack groaned, as he began to wake up. What happened? You hit the wall and got knocked out, I told him. Now stop moving, I'm not finished healing you. For a moment I thought he was going to protest, but instead he stayed still and remained quiet. Dead end, Suma said, examining the end of the tunnel. We need to turn back. Not necessarily, Von Pack said, standing up, after I entered the healing spell. I have an affinity for nature magic. I can move the dirt and extend the tunnels. I thought you were a healer, I asked. I am, he replied. Not everyone who becomes a healer has to have an affinity for healing magic. I suppose that's true, I realized. I don't know. We may just want to go back and take the other tunnel, Suma stated. That would take time, and if we want to win, then time is not something we have to spare, Von Pack reasoned. Digging out the tunnel will take time too, and there is no guarantee it will be faster, I pointed out. He seemed annoyed by my response, but instead of snapping, he relented and agreed to go back. We came to the conclusion that if the right was a dead end too, then we would dig rather than go all the way back and lose all the progress we have made.